This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Today's guest, I'm thrilled to be speaking with. He's the founder of Autograph Eye and one of the few non-OD CEOs in optometry. He started his career as an optician by co-founding the Eye Doctors, which it was scaled into the company True Eye Experts, which became an award-winning multi-location optometry group in the Tampa Bay area. And he has led it as CEO for over 14 years. Today, he consults with practice owners on growth, office efficiency, and new revenue streams. And he's a featured speaker at optical seminars and a regular industry voice on multi-location practice growth. In addition to all that, he's also a master optician. Please welcome Kevin Whaley Stefany to the group. So Kevin, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This will be fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting conversation. And with that, what was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
Yeah, I've watched several of your channels now, and I think I have a similar answer to a lot of people. I don't know what my over/under today will be on book recommendations, but I think it's just being that lifelong inquisitive learner, and always trying to find the next thing and then apply that to make the business more successful. I think having your private book club with your colleagues or with other people in the industry and say, how do we do this? How do we do this in the industry? And how do we make this work for eye care? It's a unique field, but I think just constantly being that lifelong learner and surrounding yourself with people that love the same thing, has been the biggest secret.
What comes to mind with, let's draw a direct line to that. So your peer network, your group, tell me a time when you made a different decision based off of how you surrounded yourself with the support and help. Yeah,
I think when I first started, in the industry, you come in with a lot of new ideas and a lot of different things, and so I would walk into an office or a location, and I would see a dozen different things that needed to get improved or done differently, or I recognized that the owners or the other team members really didn't want to hear my list of suggestions or ideas, right? They really had their own goals and their own initiatives. And so I think when we started listening and asking questions, understanding where they were and trying to meet them where they were at, and helping them implement the one or two things that they wanted to do that might not be on my list at all, but I think understanding where their stressor was to try to help them with that one thing is really what changed for me. And I think it's just having that group of people to bounce ideas off of, and just being inquisitive with everything in the practice. And when you run into a challenge yourself and you're like, well, I don't know how we're going to do this. It's having that colleague or that peer to be able to reach out to and say, hey, have you guys dealt with this, or have you had this problem? Yeah. So I've been in, optometry group share organizations for over a decade, and so just business groups as well that have really helped me when I reach that, issue or that problem, and I think I jokingly call it my business therapy at this point. But, I think we all reach that ceiling of complexity in our lives every 90 days or so. And they're like, I don't know how to get over this hurdle, and it's super valuable to find somebody else that's done it.
You said a lot there I want to digest and take in. So I like the complexity ceiling piece. I've said that too. And I want to touch a little bit on what you said about, it's almost a change management thing. Like, I knew all these things that had to change, but you started with something that was important to the people you were affecting. So if you had your own staff as you were CEO, I'm guessing, how did that look when you were CEO of a company running it? How did it look for that change management? When was the time we were like, well, we need to really change all this stuff, but I got to start here because people aren't going to buy into the big change?
Yeah. So when I started, it was called the Eye Doctors, and there was one location in Tampa, Florida, one doctor and 3 employees. So I was, employee number 4, so it was a small group. I think that there was a lot of opportunity to do a lot of things better in that store. And I think it was just recognizing that, these people here have their own ideas of how they want to improve it, or maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to come to work and be a great team member and a great employee. But I think digging down and figuring out, okay, what is their pain point and what is their issue that I can maybe help them with? And rather than telling them what they need to do, I think the better, I learned over time, right? I mean, you fail forward, right? Is to recognize that there's something that they're struggling with. And once they overcome that problem, and it might be personal, it might not be professional, but there's something that's interfering with their ability to move forward. And I think when you can kind of capture that and work on that or help them with that piece of it, then they're able to do it. I think when you teach somebody how to overcome an issue that they want to overcome, right? Then you've created something that they can then apply those same skills and concepts for the next problem they have, and you can help them overcome something else. And so, as a manager, I think one of the first things you learn is, my time is not important as everybody else's time right now, right? I can work twice as hard, but there's a limit. I can only do twice as much, right? And It's great that, I'm capable of doing all that, but, I've got 3 other people here, 5, 10, 100 other people. And the more that I can get them more motivated, more engaged, better skills, then the better they're going to be able to do that. And just having them, see that bigger picture and then implement their own, next goal and just help them with it rather than pedaling harder and going twice as fast, letting them recognize that, I really could do it differently. And now it's easier for me. So now I can tackle the next obstacle in life,
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about your growth, like as you're growing the practices, right? So you started off as an employee. Talk to us a little bit about how you went from just working there to becoming the CEO. Talk about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I started as an optician with the group and just as an employee. Oddly enough, the doctor had hired a headhunter to find, the next optician. So the other opticians that I know now that were interviewing for the position at the same time were really incredible, really impressive group of people. And so I think we both always thank that headhunter for connecting the 2 of us together. But when I met with my partner at the time, we sat down in his office and he said, I'd really like for this to be $1 million office. And I said, well, if that's all we're trying to do, I don't think this is going to be the right fit for me. I'm going to need to do a little more. And he sat forward in his chair and he goes, how much more? So I think what seemed like this unattainable goal for him, I was like, I don't know. That's really not that big of a deal. I'd like to keep going. And so I think once he recognized where his ceiling was in his mind and that it could be bigger, that we could, take advantage of that S on the end of our name, that we were the eye doctors, not one doctor doing $1 million, I think he recognized that we could do a lot more together. Yeah. But, it's the same thing I would recommend. A lot of people have asked me, how do I get a CEO in my practice? How do I, have another layer of management? How do I create you, right? Which is flattering and I appreciate it. But, I think you've got to coach somebody. You've got to spend time with them. You've got to engage with them. You've got to recommend a book that they read that then you discuss with them and how it could impact the business, right? And so, I was reading a couple books a week when I first started. I had a long drive, and so I was able to digest a fair amount during that drive. But I was always coming in, fired up and excited from what I had read and learned on my drive in or on my drive home the night before, and trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? How do we implement this piece of it? And so I would just encourage anybody looking to try to create that manager to do that same thing and take somebody from an employee. I then received some profit share, and as the company grew, I started getting profits, and then that eventually turned into us having a structure where I was able to be a minority owner in the optical. So, I think it just grew over time, but I think that's a very logical structure for a lot of people. Whether it's profit share or phantom equity, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But, when you've got somebody that's leaning in and is able to get that to that level, I think you've got to just recognize a long-term plan. And I think a lot of people talk about, as soon as we make more, I'll be able to give you more. But I think getting that structure in place ahead of time, and so that everybody knows what it looks like when we're bigger and what those targets are, is super important. So I had other team members that were on our team that went first. They were getting some bonuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are my other sort of C-suite team members that started at entry level with me that I had grown and groomed along with the company. And when we ended, they were getting profit share and discussing, had we kept going, what ownership would look like. So, they were just that dug in. And I will say what was so funny is, as an owner, I was saying, well, should we really give them this profit share? They've been getting bonuses for growing so much, and we've been growing and doing well. But I will say it, we kind of doubled down, and it was worth it for everybody when we said, okay, now you're going to get a part of the profits. And then they really started paying attention to those line items, like how much are we paying for this, IT service? And do we need to do this much of it? It just became way more interesting to them when they had a piece of the pie, to be able to do it. So
that is, I just heard a lot of doctors just shriek about, oh my goodness, you showed me your numbers. So talk about that. How did you manage that? Because I can imagine a lot of doctors are like, well, I don't want to share that with my staff. I think they'll abuse it or take advantage of it, or they don't really understand it. Like talk to us about those.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people say staff, and I it's just one of those words. Everybody has their word that they're like they cringe about, but to me, it's a team. They were our team. They still are, and I think that's what's so impactful is helping them develop and grow to that level. And so it's a different mentality of oh, you're just an employee versus we're on the same team and doing this together. And I think, we tried once before, read The Great Game of Business, right? And then we were like, oh yeah, we'll just share all the numbers with everybody. And it was just deer in the headlights, everybody looking back at us like, what are you talking about? What is this, what do these numbers mean? So I think you've got to slowly, put the toe in the water. Maybe you share a little bit to start and kind of go from there. I will say, if you take a senior member, like one of your managers or somebody that's been with you a long time, and you ask them, how much money do you think the company makes and how much money do you think I make? It'll be 4 or 5 times what the actual number is. The estimates are kind of wild. And I think they just see the revenue, they see the $5,000 or the $10,000 on the credit card terminal at the end of the day. And they're like, that's all profit for the doctor. Right. And so they don't understand the economics of it. And how are they supposed to, right? They don't see the bills and what all's going in behind the scenes and how all that works. So I will say every person that I've sort of asked before I shared the number, it's always wildly off and way more than it actually is. So, when you share it, you're actually just helping them recalibrate how well you're doing.
Yeah. That's that's probably do a whole session just on the psychology of managing the people and managing the expectations like that. So let's talk a little bit about as you were growing. What did you run into that you didn't expect?
I think you learn a lot from your failures as much as you do from your successes. So, we were doing really well with that first office. So within 4 or 5 months, it had already reached the $1 million threshold. It was doing like $600K when I came in. So it was a nice office. It was booked out a couple weeks. And I was like, well, you got the demand to hit your metric already, right? So I didn't see it as that challenging. But, we didn't have a doctor 1 day a week. So we found a doctor. Luckily, we were in a suburban area and we were able to do that. And so we added a doctor 1 day a week, and we were pretty much there from, adding a few more patients and adding that doctor. But we were happy with that success. The company was doing well and growing. And so we were like, well, let's go, start another location. And so we found a location that we thought was just going to be successful, as the first one was. And it was formerly an optical that was fairly successful. It had been kind of dark for a year. And we thought, well, we'll just open up a store here. How hard could this be? And that's quite challenging. I think we didn't recognize the distance from the previous office. It was about a 45-minute drive. And that's a little far if you're trying to share staff and resources. I think something a little closer probably would have been the first. But we learned a lot from like, what structures did we need for the second? What do we need to put in place? And so, it forced us to try a lot of different things with that second location. It ended up being a great location, and I think it's one of our second largest, but it just took a lot longer to get there than what we had originally thought. And so, we had marketing that we thought was working. We had, a lot of different things that we were like, oh, this is going to be fine. This will be cake, and then we got to that second location. It was like, oh, wow, this is actually quite hard to start in a whole new area, Nobody knows who we are. Nobody knows, what our business is about. We're 45 minutes away. And so I think we learned a lot in store number 2, as you do, trying to figure it out and how to grow it from there.
Yeah, it's famous last words, right? Hold my beer. Let me see if I can do this.
Yeah. I got this. No problem. I'll do a triple Lindy with my first one. I got it.
No problem. And so now I'm going to flip it a little bit. You work with a lot of practices. You have a lot of insight. What do you see as something that's surprising to the doctors? And maybe you don't think it's surprising, but the doctors are like, oh, I didn't expect that, or I didn't notice that. Or what do you see as the most common thing that doctors and your people that you work with will say?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, doctors are in the exam room a lot of the day, right? So, we joke they're in the exam room with the lights out, but they are, they're dilating, right? But I think there's a lot of the business that's happening outside of that, right? And of course, we don't, sell product. We don't sell glasses or contacts. If the doctor isn't there doing an exam, we don't have that. We definitely need the doctor and their piece of it. But I think it's just the complexity of the things outside of the exam room. I think there's like 5 different businesses that we're doing in eye care. We're in fashion, we're in manufacturing, we're in we have a staffing. There's just a lot that's happening between the clinic and the optical, between the the retail and the back of house. And depending on your state, you get into ophthalmology, which is its own thing as well. So it's very complex, and I think that there's a small piece of it that just kind of get shut out from when you're a doctor in the exam room. And I think the first thought that a lot of doctors have is, oh, I should not see patients and I should work on the business side of it. And luckily, my partner, always enjoyed seeing patients, and he was like, "But that's what you're for, right?" So, he was like, "You've got this side of it. We'll have a meeting and we'll talk about it, but I don't really want to deal with the behind the scenes. Let me just see exams and do a great job of that, and tell me what I need to do or what we need to do, business wise to help outside of that." And so, I think there's that's probably the biggest aha is for a doctor recognizing, just the complexity of the things outside of the exam room. I was helping a colleague not too long ago deal with like a eyes in lens, like a progressive little bump at the bottom, and there's a few different manufacturers, but they were trying to understand the complexity of billing that lens, and I was like, oh, there's like 6 line items that go into the CPT code to bill that item, and they were like, I'm sorry, there's what? And I was like, yeah, well, it depends on the insurance, which line items you're doing between what all's involved with that. And they were just like mind blown for, if you prescribe this one, it's this code. If you prescribe this one that sounds so similar, it's these other codes to this insurance. And I think just the complexity of what happens, outside of the exam room can just be like mind opening to a doctor that's so focused on providing great care and helping the next patient. There's just a lot of complexity in the volume of different businesses that are happening outside of the exam room.
Yeah, that's actually a good insight, right? I think I tell people the same thing. I was like, it's like 5 different businesses in one. It's a great opportunity, but it's also can be difficult to manage everything.
Yeah, I think if you love learning, and I think we all do, you're all get inquisitive about it. It's like, oh, this is fascinating. My wife jokes that I know more designers than she does. It's just, it's an occupational thing. It is what it is. You just happen to know. I know that logo.
Yeah. There you go. And as far as, I guess in terms of what you see, because you have an interesting perspective, you see a lot of different practices. What are you seeing how different offices are dealing with staff challenges right now? What are some of the things that you're seeing working well, things that people are trying but maybe aren't working as successfully? How do you see that playing out right now?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge. I think it really got complex around COVID times, when we were all like, oh, let's, a lot of us addressed it then and tried to figure out what to do. But we have a retiring, working population as well. There's a lot of, team members that are coming that age. And I think, it's interesting to see how you can manage a younger employee that's maybe only available part-time, and can you utilize that to your benefit, to have that flexibility for somebody that maybe only works a couple days a week. I think a lot of the industry has gone to virtual assistants. There's a lot of, AI that people are playing with the charting, and I've even saw at Vision Expo some of the diagnostic equipment is being run through AI to help as well. And I think it's fascinating to see where that's going. But at the end of the day, we all think we're going to work less with AI in our lives, but actually we're working just as hard.
Yeah.
We just have this other assistant potentially helping us with it at the same time. But I think it's all about time management and using those resources. I think if you can take the job that you're trying to do and simplify it down to make it easier, it makes it so that maybe you could then train somebody else to do that, right? And if you have the skill to then teach somebody else how to do that job, then you're able to do something more complex and take another challenge on. And so I think having that mindset or that mentality among the team is really important. Some people have this sort of, it's my job, I never want to let it go. I'm the guarder of the billing secrets, right? But I think when they recognize that, well, maybe you could teach somebody else how to do these EOBs to post them into the system, and they recognize that I could train somebody how to do that. Now I can work on maybe working with the doctor about how they could, do some more coordination of benefits or, some more complex billing structures. I think that's where they recognize, I can do more than just sort of the data entry part of my job. I can take it to that next level. And I think that's where it gets exciting, is when you've kind of taken a job and simplified it to the point that it is repeatable. You have a standard operating procedure. You can give that to somebody else, and then it allows you to work on the next big project.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the way you're thinking. What I'm hearing is like more around like, hey, the culture, the structure, and then being curious and actually going the details, and actually tackling some of these problems. So what is it that kind of excites you about the industry coming up, right? Like, I hear a lot of like interesting things coming up. What do you see from your perspective? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think what's lovely about the industry, it doesn't change quickly. So, I think there's a lot of these things we all get worried about, the new biggest boogeyman coming, our way. But luckily, I think, healthcare is something that everybody values and needs. And I think the preventative side of it is really exciting. In a lot of the locations, we were actually doing preventative OCT screenings, which I think is unusual. A lot of people do a preventative retinal screening with an Optomap or another retinal device. But to do a preventative OCT and see the layers of tissue beneath, or some of the locations even did preventative corneal topographies. So I was just at a CE a couple months ago, and the corneal surgeon that does corneal cross-linking was explaining that because we do these, topographies on every patient, we're able to catch, all sorts of different corneal dystrophies or, pellucid marginal degenerate, the different corneal stuff, in addition to keratoconus and the different types of it. And so we're a larger referral source for him than a lot of other offices and doctors would be. And so he really appreciates the fact that we're catching more of the disease. And so I think the preventative side of medicine is what's exciting. I think that the equipment and the technology is only getting better. I just heard about 3 or 4 different pieces of equipment that are going to do axial length measurement devices. A lot of our doctors are excited about the Stellus lens. I am too. I think it can help a lot of patients with controlling some myopia. But, I think the standard of care is having that axial length device that helps the doctor then be able to prescribe that with some confidence. So, I think that's the sort of preventative, let's get ahead of the problem before it becomes serious, and try to lean into that side of it and make sure we're catching things, before they become a real problem.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's what we hear a lot, right? Scope expansion, new services, being able to kind of get more insight, become more of a primary healthcare. So I love that. And as far as what do you see in general, what the marketplace is looking like? Like I said, you get exposure to a lot of different people, a lot of different things. What do you see from just looking out the market scope and landscape of the business environment?
Yeah, obviously private equity has been popular and come into the industry. I always think when something new is happening, like, this won't be that big of a deal. And a lot of them have surprised me. I thought online eye care would never be as popular as it is. I thought, well, how could it ever top the percentage of people that buy shoes online, right? I like to try my shoes on to make sure they fit before I buy them. But oddly enough, more people buy eye care online than buy shoes online. But it's odd to me. I mean, you've got to have that, try it on to make sure it fits, and then have the medical side of it as well. But people did it. And I think the same thing with private equity. I thought, well, the industry's 2/3, private eye care. Surely that's where we're going to be at. And I think we're down to maybe 50% private at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's really changed, and private equity has had a big impact on what that looks like, and the private equity like groups. So, I think it's always interesting, when you get a new competitor. It's fun to adapt to and try to figure out, how do we help our patients or help the niche products that maybe the larger groups can't do. I think the beauty of private is you can implement things so quickly and so fast, and try to help the patients that maybe they can't. So, the myopia control is something that can happen a lot faster in a private office, or, fitting sclerals. When I think of, a larger corporate group, they're just not able to do some of the things that private is able to do. I mean, I've heard they can't adjust glasses in certain offices, or they can't sell a trifocal, and it's just things that can't happen in a larger setting where they're really focused on that, making it so simple, like this is all we do, and just focusing on that 80%. They're really, really good at that. But there's a lot out in the fringe, for what a private office can do, and embracing brands, or embracing uniqueness. And I think that's where it gets more fun. It gets more creative too, to help somebody custom make something that maybe was really going to help them, and help them at a level that they might not be able to otherwise. I have Prism in my glasses, and so I wanted, when Warby Parker was popular back in 2018, 2019, I wanted to see what it would be like to get one. And they really weren't able to do it. And so then they finally messaged me back, and they said, well, we'll charge you more if you want to have Prism in your glasses. And I was like, if I want to. This is an interesting statement. So then I said, okay, I'll pay the additional charge for it. And then they induced Prism. So they got the PDs and the Segron from what I had sent them as well. And I was like, okay, we won't intentionally make Prism, but we'll intentionally put some in for you. So anyway, I thought the frame was interesting, and I think a lot of people do, but I'm sure they're better at it than they were, several years ago. But just interesting to see, what they're capable of doing or not doing. But if you think of that, I mean, that's the type of thing that you can do in a private office. I mean, be the Prism expert versus, we don't handle that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, trying to compete where other people are not. So let's switch it up a little bit. Tell me a story that is formative for you, kind of made you who you are, the way you think, something that's really impactful for you. Could have been when you were much younger, could have been more recent. But yeah, tell me a little bit about something that, a story that really resonates.
Yeah, I think I've had the pleasure of developing a lot of team members over the years, and I think it's really, impactful to see them thrive and grow. And so many of them, I've seen them buy their first car, or buy their first house, or, start a family. And, I think when you first meet them, and they've maybe got some anxiety, and, they just don't know, what they're really capable of, and having them open their minds to what they can do. I think that's where it gets really exciting to work with this team of people that you see day in and day out, sometimes more than you do your family, and to watch them develop and grow and really thrive and be their better self. I think is just so exciting. We had a receptionist one time that, had a car problem on her way to work. And, most employees, would have just called out and said, I'm out, my car broke down on the way to work. I'll see y'all later. That's what we were expecting. And instead, the person went to a rental car facility, told us they'd be a couple hours late, and rented a car to drive 30 minutes into the office and be there for the majority of their shift. And we were just so taken back that this person was that motivated and engaged in the mission of the company. We paid for the rental car and helped her get her car repaired, but I think that's what's so exciting, is to take a moment like that and just recognize it for what it is. It's somebody that's that bought in to wanting to be there at work and wanting to do, watch it grow and develop. It's really neat to see, a lot of team members do that, and get to a management level. I generally try to meet with new team members when they come on board, and find out what are they looking for. I mean, some people just want a 9-to-5 job, right? I mean, they want to do a good job when they're there, but their focus is family and other things, and that's totally fine. That's great. But I think when you're sitting down with those people and they want something bigger, they want to have an impact, they want to do more, and you kind of get that out of them. They're asking for a project, or they're asking to do more for the company, and just to develop them and have them be really proud of something that they've done, and have it be their idea. It's really exciting to watch somebody do something that they didn't think they could do, and do it so well that you're like, well, let's celebrate this together and make sure the whole team knows that you found a better way for us to do this, right? It's not us taking this on and doing it; it's you doing it, and we're just helping you get there. And I've seen people do things personally as well, just to, sometimes it's conquering their debt, or sometimes it's being able to, like I say, save up and buy their first home, and recognizing that they might not have been able to do that had we not given them the confidence to be able to do what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's we've had several students that have gone on to be ODs, and I think that's a piece of that as well, just making sure that they know we have the confidence in them to be everything that they want to be.
Yeah, love it. And as far as some of the things that we also like to kind of talk about are, hey, looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self? Usually it's after graduating OD school, but for you, I'll let you decide when you think the most critical time for feedback for you would have been.
I jokingly say I wasn't sure I was ready for feedback. I think, we jokingly call it the F word, but feedback is really important, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we give it to people. And I was in a conference earlier this year, and I said, well, what if the person isn't ready to receive the feedback? Why should I give it? Why should we do it? And they said, you're actually probably robbing them of that opportunity to improve by not giving them the feedback. They can do with that information what they would like, but for you to keep that to yourself and not give it to them, you might not be sharing something with them that they need to know. And so it's helped me give more feedback, but I still fall back on that. I don't know that my younger self was ready for the feedback, right? But I do think management is difficult, right? I think managing people and finding that joy and embracing it is a real challenge. And I definitely wasn't the best at it for quite a long period of time. But I think you learn from those challenges. And, I definitely needed a lot of that advice and feedback that I probably wasn't ready for when I first started in the industry. And, I don't know that there was a particular moment that stood out for me, but I think it was just, learning from this mistake, and growing for the next one, I think was really what I needed. But, if I could go back and give myself some advice now, I absolutely would. And it would be about how to manage better and how to help the team perform at their best. That's what I would go back and try to impart on myself if I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the advice you would give your younger self is take feedback. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll teach myself the F word. Yeah.
That's
what I would do.
That's interesting. I like that. So I'm curious, Kevin, what are the things that, as you've had this career in optical, what's been the number one thing that has surprised you about where the industry has gone over the course of the last however many years you've been in it?
I think it's changed a lot, and I think I've been in about 20 years now, and I think it's always adapting, but it's definitely a slow adaptation. We don't have anything like earth shattering in the industry. We all get excited about things, and, we definitely beta test new things so they come out to try to see what works and get excited about things. But, I think what's wonderful about the industry is once we all sort of change collectively, then that sort of becomes a standard of care. And I think that's what's so exciting about it is once we all figure out a better way to do it, I think that we're all embracing that. Retinal images are one that I think is, in 90% of offices at this point, doing screening retinal images. We could all do it better potentially and have different thoughts on that. But I think that's something that has gone from, almost non-existent when I started in the industry. A few people were starting to do it, and Optomaps for $200,000, right? To now, they're kind of everywhere, and you can just rent one.
Yeah.
Of course you should have one. It's almost the standard of care. I recognize retinal cameras sometimes take a higher definition, more colored photo. But, I think that I think it's really exciting to see that when something does, latch hold like that, it really goes well. And I see a lot of promise in myopia control. It started with just a handful of people, fitting RGPs and maybe doing some drops. And now there's, a multitude of solutions. And it's nice to have the first eyewear, that we can prescribe and is FDA authorized. And, it's exciting to see where we're going with the improvements. And hopefully we speed up a little bit with getting to the next thing a little bit faster. But, it is exciting that when we collectively catch on, it usually doesn't trail back. When something really takes hold, it kind of becomes ubiquitous. It really hits everywhere.
Yeah. And so, Kevin, I think we can go on for a long time, honestly, because I really like your insights. I love how you talked about the management side and how to actually create that environment and culture and what you should be looking for. What does good look like? And if people want to learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can reach out. Our website's autographeye.com. But if you want to put my contact information in the show notes, I'm happy to reach out and talk with anybody that wants to chat through it. And I'd love to learn about their practice. Like I said, we're all inquisitive learners, so I usually like to ask a lot of questions, as you saw when we first met. And I think that it's fascinating. Everybody does something really well, and I'm always just trying to find what is it that you do better than anybody else, and tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that's some of the lessons I've learned today from you. I heard Peter Drucker, as a management guy, say like, hey, the job of management is to make everyone's strengths so strong that the weaknesses are irrelevant. And it sounds like you kind of have that philosophy. I also learned that, hey, making sure that keep learning and always be curious. That gets you a long way, along with surrounding yourself with people who maybe already have solved the problem or can think about how to solve the problem, or your peer network that kind of help and support you. So I appreciate those insights. Did I summarize that right, or did I miss anything?
Yeah, that was beautiful. You said it way better than I did.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, Kevin, thank you again for being a guest on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ankit.
Yeah, and thank you, audience. If you learned something or laughed, just please share the podcast or the YouTube video with a friend, and make sure to subscribe, because you won't miss an episode if you subscribe. And if you see the link for a meeting and in the show notes, please make sure to sign up, and I'll be happy to send you a free copy of my book, Optometry Redefined. Thanks again, Kevin, for being on the show. And this has been another exciting episode of Optometrists Building Empires. We'll see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.